The rain pounded on the roof of my old house in Centerville, creating the measured rhythm I'd learned to appreciate during my years of solitude. 72 years of living had taught me to find peace in the simple things. I sat in my favorite dark leather chair that Mildred had once called monstrously uncomfortable. In front of me on the coffee table was a calendar open to April. A red circle circled the date, the 28th, Christopher and Sarah's wedding anniversary. It had been 8 years since they'd been married. Sarah stood at the altar in a white dress and smiled that smile that didn't reach her eyes. I had remained silent then, thinking that young people were entitled to their mistakes. Now I regretted that silence. The gift idea had come to me a week ago when I was talking to my neighbor, Mrs. Coleman. She mentioned that she had seen Sarah at the realtor's office looking at pictures of expensive real estate. Perhaps the young family needed help with housing. Christopher had been working as a manager at an electronic components factory for 6 years. The salary was barely enough for running costs. Sarah hadn't worked since she married, citing finding herself and planning a family. The kids never came along. I grabbed a notebook and jotted down gift options: a trip to Europe, a new car, a deposit to buy a house. The last option seemed the most practical. I had savings. 30 years as a county judge had provided a comfortable retirement. Perhaps a generous gift would help me get closer to my son's family. Sitting down at my desk, I opened a folder of bank records. It was worth knowing exactly where I stood financially before making a large expenditure. Putting on my reading glasses, I laid out the statements for the last 3 months. And then my eye caught on an unfamiliar line in the statement for March. A large sum had been debited from my savings account on the 23rd. $485,000, almost half of my savings. I took off my glasses, wiped them clean, and put them back on. The numbers hadn't changed. Next to the amount was a note: transfer by power of attorney, recipient, Premium Estate Real Estate Agency. My heart started to race. I'd never heard of this agency, and I certainly hadn't authorized such a transfer. Power of attorney. I remembered signing it 2 years ago after a mild stroke. Christopher seemed the only sensible choice for emergencies. I never envisioned the document being used against me. The phone rang. Christopher's name popped up on the display. Ironically, he was calling just as I discovered his and his wife's deception. "Hello, Dad. How are you?" My son's voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. "Christopher," I tried to speak calmly, "I have a question for you." "Of course you do. Listen, Sarah and I were thinking of coming over to your place this weekend." Christopher, do you remember the power of attorney I gave you?" Pause, too long a pause. "Of course I remember, Dad. Why? Explain to me, please, what the Premium Estate Agency is." Another pause. Sarah's voice could be heard in the background. "Dad, it's hard to explain over the phone. Why don't we meet?" $485,000, Christopher, from my account, without my authorization. "Look, Dad, I can explain everything. It's not what you think." "What do I think?" "We wanted to surprise you. For your birthday, Sarah found a great house." "Surprise?" I couldn't contain my sarcasm. "For my birthday, which isn't until September?" The lie was so clumsy, it was almost funny. "Christopher, you bought a house for yourself with my money. Don't make up fairy tales." Sarah's voice in the background grew louder, more insistent. "Dad, let me explain in person. I'll be there tomorrow morning." "Don't. I'll handle this situation myself." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'll see a lawyer tomorrow." "Dad, don't jump to conclusions. We can work this out as a family." "Family?" I chuckled. "Stealing money from your own father is your idea of family?" "It's not stealing. I have power of attorney." "A power of attorney for emergency medical expenses, not to buy real estate for your wife." Sarah was saying something angrily in the background, and Christopher covered the phone with his hand. Then she picked up the phone. "Maddock, there's been a misunderstanding. We just wanted to help you with your investment." "Help with investments?" "The real estate market is booming, and we thought buying a house would be a good investment for your money." "And you decided to take charge of this investment without asking the owner of the money?" "Christopher is your son. He has power of attorney." "Power of attorney doesn't give you the right to spend my money on your whims." "It's not a whim. Besides," her voice grew colder, "sooner or later we're going to get all of your assets. We just decided not to wait. The insolence of those words made me numb for a few seconds. I see. Understand what? Ikram, now I know what you really think of me. An old fool who has to hand over all the money in silence. Maddox, that's not what I meant. I hung up. I turned on my computer and found the Premium Estate website, a villa in the upscale neighborhood of Oaks Hill. 4 bedrooms, pool, 2-car garage. It was priced exactly as written off. The photos showed the beautiful home Sarah had dreamed of since the beginning of their marriage. Now she got what she wanted, only I paid for it. While I was planning the anniversary gift, my son and his wife had already become owners of a luxury property at my expense. I reread the power of attorney. Every clause confirmed my suspicions. Christopher had acted far beyond the authority granted. Anger gradually replaced cold calculation. I'd been a judge for 30 years and knew how the law worked. I had every reason to nullify the deal. The phone rang again. Christopher wasn't going to give up. What now? Dad, please, don't take it out on me. We can discuss this calmly. Calmly? After your wife explained my place to me? She overreacted. Sarah's very worried. Christopher, you're the one who ruined the relationship when you decided to steal from me. We didn't steal. That's enough. I'm seeing a lawyer tomorrow. If you want to make things right, you have until the morning to figure out how to get my money back. I hung up again and turned off the phone. In 72 years, I had learned to deal with various difficulties, but the betrayal of my own son was a blow that could not be prepared for. Justice had to be done, whatever the consequences for family relations. In the morning, I woke up earlier than usual, though I didn't fall asleep immediately. My mind was spinning, analyzing every detail of my conversation with Christopher and Sarah yesterday. Their attempts to justify their actions had been pathetic, but what struck me most was their lack of remorse. They didn't see themselves as guilty. After breakfast, I sat down at my desk and laid out all the documents in chronological order. Bank statements, a copy of the power of attorney, printouts from the real estate agency's website. I needed to reconstruct the full picture of what had happened. As a judge, I was used to working methodically with evidence, and now those skills came in handy. The power of attorney was dated April 18, 2022 year. I remembered that day, a week after I had been discharged from the hospital, when the doctors were satisfied that there would be no consequences of the stroke. Christopher had insisted on the document, citing my age and the need for future insurance. At the time, it seemed like a sensible precaution. Now I realized that my son had been thinking about my money 2 years ago. I carefully reread every clause of the power of attorney. The powers were clearly limited: paying for medical care, utilities, buying groceries and medications, and managing ongoing expenses in the event of the principal's incapacity. Nothing about real estate, investments, or large purchases. The attorney who drafted the document specifically emphasized these restrictions when we discussed the wording. The next step was to review the bank transactions for the past 6 months. I made a detailed spreadsheet of all receipts and expenditures, noting unusual transactions. It turned out that Christopher had used the power of attorney before, but within reasonable limits. In December, he paid my heating bill while I was laid up with the flu. In January, he bought prescription drugs for a doctor's prescription. These transactions were legitimate and not questionable. But the purchase of the house on March 23rd was dramatically outside the scope of the authority granted. It was a willful exceeding of the power of attorney, which carries both civil and criminal penalties. I opened my laptop and found the county real estate registry website. Typing in the address of the house in Oaks Hill, I got the full details of the transaction. The buyer was Christopher Preston, the seller the heirs of one Jennifer Lockwood, who died last year. The house had been on the market for 3 months, and the price had dropped $15,000 in that time. So Sarah had really been watching the listings and had waited for the right time. Particularly interesting was the section on the method of payment. The entire amount was transferred in a lump sum from my savings account. No mortgage, no installments. For a young family with Christopher's income, this was impossible without outside help. Any bank would have suspected something amiss when checking income. But when the money came from an elderly relative's account, there were usually no questions. I printed out all the transaction documents and put them in a separate folder, then dialed the bank's number and waited to be connected to a manager. Unmanned. Centerville Bank. Manager Rachel Watson. How can I help you? Good afternoon. Maddox Preston, a customer of your bank. I'd like detailed information about a transaction made on my account on March 23rd. Just a moment. Let me check. Yes, I see the transaction. A large transfer to a real estate agent. The transaction was made under a power of attorney. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Tell me, did anyone at the bank contact me to confirm this transaction? No, sir. With a notarized power of attorney, no further verification is required unless the amount exceeds the limits. What limits? $500,000 a month for proxy transactions, so Christopher could spend even more. The thought was unpleasant. Sure. Is there a procedure for challenging transactions made in excess of the power of attorney? Of course, sir. You'd have to file a written complaint stating the specific violations. The bank will conduct an internal investigation. I'll do that. I'll prepare the paperwork and be there tomorrow morning. I'll be waiting, Mr. Preston. After talking to the bank, I was somewhat relieved. There was a dispute procedure, and I had every reason to use it. But the bank procedure was only the first step. The main thing was to void the house transaction itself. I pulled out an old address book and found Patricia Hamilton's number. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but during my time in court, she had proven herself to be a competent and principled attorney. If anyone could help in this situation, it was her. Hamilton Law Office, Patricia says. Patricia, this is Maddox Preston. Do you remember me? Of course I do. Judge Preston, how are you? We haven't heard from you in court in a while. Things aren't going very well, to be honest. I need some legal help. You do? What's up? I told her the whole situation without leaving out details. Patricia listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a few seconds. Maddox, this is a pretty serious matter. Exceeding the power of attorney could be considered fraud. Are you prepared to go all the way? I don't know yet. I want to see what my options are first. I see. Can you come by tomorrow afternoon? We can discuss the details in person. Sure. Thank you, Patricia. You're welcome. And Maddox, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. After talking to the lawyer, I made myself a strong coffee and sat down in my favorite chair. It was overcast outside the window, but it had stopped raining. Neighborhood kids were playing in the yard, their laughter coming through the glass. A normal, quiet life that I could no longer enjoy. My thoughts involuntarily went back to when Christopher first started dating Sarah. It was 8 years ago. He had brought her to a family dinner for Mildred's birthday. Sarah seemed a little too confident for a 24-year-old girl. She looked around our house with an appraising eye, asking questions about my work, wondering about our plans for the future. After dinner, when Sarah and Christopher left, Mildred said, "She's a beautiful girl and smart." "Too smart," I replied, "and too interested in our finances." "Don't be so suspicious, Maddox. Christopher is happy." Mildred was right, as always, about her son's happiness. But I was also right about Sarah. In all the years I'd known her, she'd never shown any genuine interest in our family. But she was always hinting that Christopher could earn more, that they needed help with the apartment, that it would be nice to save up for a vacation. This was especially evident during the wedding preparations. Sarah chose the most expensive restaurant in town, ordered a dress for $3,000, insisted on a professional photographer and videographer. Christopher went into debt trying to pay for all of these expenses, and when money became tight, Sarah hinted that his father might be able to help. I paid for the restaurant and the music, thinking it was my fatherly duty. But even then, I realized that Sarah saw me as a source of funding for her ambitions. After the wedding, the hints became even more transparent. Then they needed help with furniture, then with repairs, then with the purchase of a car. I helped within reasonable limits, not wanting to spoil the relationship with my only son. But each time I felt that Sarah took my help for granted. No thanks, just more requests and hints that I could do more. The week before the wedding, I finally decided to talk to Christopher straight. We sat on the veranda of my house, and I tried to explain my concerns to my son. "Christopher, are you sure Sarah loves you and not your prospects?" "What do you mean, Dad? She's very interested in money, more than she's interested in your feelings." "Sarah's a practical girl. She's thinking about our future. Are you thinking about your present? Can you give her the standard of living she expects?" "I'll do my best." And then, sooner or later, he'll stop talking. Sooner or later what? Well, your inheritance. I'm an only son. Those words struck me then. Christopher was young, with his whole life ahead of him, and he was already counting on my death. But I kept silent, not wanting to spoil the pre-wedding mood. I realized now that my silence had been a mistake. I should have spoken up and perhaps even tried to talk my son out of the marriage. But at the time, it seemed that time would put everything in its place, that Sarah would grow up and change. Well, time has indeed set things right, just not in the way I'd hoped. I got up and walked over to the closet where the family photos were kept. I found the album of wedding pictures and opened it to the page with the ceremonial portrait of the newlyweds. Christopher was smiling genuinely and happily. Sarah was smiling too, but there was a coldness, a calculating quality in her eyes. At the time, I wrote it off to the bride's excitement, but now I realized that I had seen my sister-in-law's real face. The next picture showed the banquet. Sarah was chatting with the guests, accepting congratulations, but she kept looking at the gifts. She looked especially closely at the envelopes of money. Even on her wedding day, she was thinking about profit. I closed the album and put it back in the closet. There was no point in torturing myself with memories. I need to focus on the present and decide how to proceed. Tomorrow I'll meet with a lawyer and find out what my legal options are. In the meantime, I need to gather as much evidence as possible. I sat down at the computer again and began searching for information on the previous owners of the house in Oaks Hill. Jennifer Lockwood had died at the age of 84, leaving the house to her 3 children. They sold the property through an agency, lowering the price several times in 3 months. For the heirs, the main thing was to get rid of the property faster and divide the money. That explained why Sarah had been able to buy the house at a relatively favorable price. She must have been watching the listing, waiting for the price to drop and picking the right time to buy. All of this took time and planning, so the idea to use my money didn't come to them spontaneously, but was well thought out. In the evening, I cooked a simple dinner and sat in front of the TV, but I couldn't concentrate on the programs. My thoughts kept returning to what had happened. In 72 years of life, I had learned to cope with various difficulties, but the betrayal of my own son was a blow for which it was impossible to prepare. The phone rang around 9 in the evening. Christopher was trying again. I stared at the blinking screen for a long time, but never answered. What was there to talk about? He'd already said everything yesterday. The money had been spent, the house had been bought, and they thought I should be happy about the investment. After 10 p.m. came the text message, "Dad, let's meet and discuss things calmly. We can find a solution." I deleted the message without responding. What kind of solution can they offer? They don't have the money back. They don't want to sell the house. That leaves only the legal route. Before going to bed, I went over all the documents I had collected one more time. The evidence was solid: exceeding the power of attorney, misuse of funds, lack of consent of the account owner. Any court would invalidate the deal. The only question was whether I'd be willing to take it to court against my own son. In the morning, I woke up with a clear head and a firm intention to see the case through. At breakfast, I went through all the documents I had collected, made sure I hadn't forgotten anything, and folded them neatly into a leather folder. I was scheduled to meet Patricia at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but first I had to visit the bank. The Centerville Bank was located in the center of town, in a beautiful red brick building that had been built back in the 30s. I had been a customer of this bank for over 20 years and knew many of the employees personally. Rachel Watson greeted me in a friendly manner, but when I explained the purpose of my visit, her face became serious. "Mr. Preston, I understand your concern. Let's go over the details of the operation carefully." She pulled out my file and spread the documents on the table. A copy of the power of attorney, a transfer request signed by Christopher, bank statements. "You see," Rachel explained, "technically your son was acting within the authority granted. We have a notarized power of attorney." "But look at the clauses in that power of attorney," I objected. "It clearly states medical expenses, utilities, groceries. Not a word about buying real estate." Rachel reread the document carefully. "You're right. There's really no mention of major purchases or investments. But there is a general phrase about dealing with urgent financial matters. Buying a $500,000 house is an urgent financial matter? Of course not. Excuse me, Mr. Preston. Our transaction officer should have looked more closely at the power of attorney. What can we do now? You can file a formal complaint about the misuse of the power of attorney. The bank will conduct an internal investigation, and if the misuse is confirmed, will attempt to recover the funds. And if the recipient, the real estate agency, refuses to return the money, then you will have to go to court. But the bank will support your claims if it recognizes its mistake in the transaction. I filled out a statement about the disputed transaction and attached copies of all the documents. Rachel promised that the bank commission would review the case within 5 working days. Leaving the bank, I drove to Patricia Hamilton's office. Her law office was located in a small but elegant building on Main Street. Patricia met me herself, an elegant woman in her 50s, with short gray hair and attentive gray eyes. We'd known each other for over a decade, and I'd always respected her professionalism. "Maddock, come in. Would you like some coffee?" "I'd love some." We went into her office, a large high-ceilinged room filled with bookcases. Patricia poured coffee from a silver coffee pot and gestured for me to sit in a comfortable chair across from her desk. "So, tell me more about the situation. Yesterday on the phone, I understood the general picture, but I would like to hear the details." I told in detail about everything that had happened, showed the documents, explained my relationship with my son and daughter-in-law. Patricia listened attentively, occasionally making notes in her notebook. "I see," she said when I was finished. "We have a few options. The first is to try to resolve the issue peacefully through negotiations with your son. I've already tried that. They think they're right. The second option is to file a lawsuit to invalidate the deal. We have serious grounds: exceeding the power of attorney, lack of consent of the owner of the funds." "What are the chances of success?" "Very high. The power of attorney clearly limits the powers of your son, and the purchase of real estate is clearly beyond these limits. Any court will understand this." "What's the third option?" "Superfirm. File a police report for fraud. Using someone else's money without the owner's consent under the guise of legal authority can be a criminal offense." I leaned back in my chair, pondering what I had heard. A criminal case against my own son was too radical, but I wasn't going to put up with stealing either. "Patricia, if we file a civil suit, what happens to the house?" "The court will order a restitution order. If your son can't return the money voluntarily, the house will be sold at public auction and the proceeds will be given to you." "How long will this process take?" "With such clear evidence, 3 to 4 months. We can apply for an expedited hearing, given your age and the nature of the case." "Is there any way to foreclose on the house now so they can't sell it?" Sure, we'll file a motion for injunctive relief at the same time as the lawsuit. The court will seize the property pending final judgment." Patricia pulled out some standardized forms from her desk and started filling them out. "Maddock, I must warn you of the possible consequences. The legal case against your son will inevitably affect your family relationships. They're already damaged. Christopher made his choice when he decided to spend my money without asking." "I see. Then let's get started on the paperwork." We spent the next hour drafting a statement of claim. Patricia worked quickly and professionally, formulating each point with legal precision. The main demand: to recognize the sale as invalid and to oblige the defendants to return the money spent. "We will also demand reimbursement of court costs and moral damages," Patricia added. "That's a lot of money. And if Christopher claims that he acted in my interests, let him prove it. Buying a house for him and his wife to live in cannot be considered acting in your best interest. Besides, he didn't notify you of his intention to make such a purchase." "All right then. When can we file?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll finalize the wording tonight, and we'll file in court." Patricia poured more coffee and leaned back in her chair. "Maddock, can I ask you a personal question? Are you really ready to see this case through? The process can be painful." "Patricia, I'm 72 years old. I've been a judge for 30 years, and I've always fought for justice. Now that my own family is at stake, should I back down?" "I understand. I just wanted to make sure you understood the implications." "I do. One more thing. I'd like to change my will." "Disinherit your son?" "Not completely, but significantly reduce his share. If he's willing to spend my money while I'm alive, he can't expect much after I'm gone." Patricia pulled out another form. "This can be done in conjunction with the lawsuit. To whom would you like to bequeath the bulk of your estate? I haven't decided yet. Perhaps to charitable organizations or a scholarship fund for law students. Well, that's a good idea. You think about it, and I'll draft some wills. We discussed the details of the upcoming process. Patricia explained that the first hearing would be scheduled 2 to 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed. Before that time, the court would consider a motion to seize the property. What if Christopher tries to contact you before the trial? Patricia asked. What would you advise? It's best not to communicate directly. All negotiations should be done through lawyers. This will protect you from pressure or manipulation. I agree. Christopher already called yesterday, tried to make excuses. I'm not going to listen to any more excuses. Wise decision. Give me his phone number. I'll contact him and explain the situation formally. Patricia wrote down Christopher's contact information in her notebook. One more important point, she continued. Couture, we need to establish the exact value of the house at the time of purchase. If it was underpriced, it could be an additional offense. I checked the agency's website. The price matches the listing. That's good, but we'll still order an independent appraisal. It's standard procedure for these cases. The meeting was coming to an end. Patricia organized all the paperwork into a folder and reiterated the plan of action. CUA, so tomorrow we file a lawsuit and a motion to seize the property. In a day or two, we get a court ruling on the seizure. First hearings in 2 to 3 weeks. And you'll notify Christopher when the suit is filed? Yes, that's my responsibility. He'll be notified through the court, but I'll call him tonight. Thank you, Patricia. I honestly didn't think I'd ever have to sue my own son. Unfortunately, family conflicts over money are more common than they seem. You are doing the right thing by protecting your rights. I shook Patricia's hand and headed for the exit. It was sunny outside, but the mood remained gloomy. There was a fight ahead, the outcome of which was legally certain, but which would change my relationship with my son forever. At home, I poured myself a whiskey, for the first time in many months, and sat down in my favorite chair. The court papers were being prepared, the lawyer had taken the case, and the bank had started an internal investigation. The machinery of justice was starting, and there would be no stopping it. The phone rang around 6 in the evening. Patricia kept her word and contacted Christopher. I wonder how he reacted to the news of the lawsuit. He probably didn't believe it at first, then tried to make excuses, and Sarah probably accused her husband of underestimating her father-in-law's resolve. I didn't take the call. The time for talking had passed. Now everything would be decided in court, according to the law, without emotion or family attachments. Exactly the way I had been used to working all my professional life. The day after my meeting with Patricia, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. The impending lawsuit seemed inevitable, but part of me still hoped that Christopher would come to his senses and find a way to make things right. Maybe he'd contact me, apologize, offer to refund the money. Foolish hopes, I realized, but I couldn't get rid of them completely. In the morning, Patricia called to tell me that the papers had been filed with the court. The motion to seize the property would be heard on an expedited basis, most likely tomorrow. She gave Christopher formal notice. He had the right to hire an attorney and prepare objections. How did he react to your call? I asked. At first, he didn't believe me. Then he started making excuses. Finally, he handed the phone to his wife. She was more aggressive, saying you were being unreasonable. I see. They still don't think they're guilty. Exactly, but that's their problem. Legally, your position is impeccable. After I talked to my lawyer, I tried to go about my normal business. I went to the store, checked the mail, watered the flowers in the garden, but my thoughts kept returning to my son and daughter-in-law. I wonder what they are doing now. Discussing the situation, looking for a way out, blaming each other. Around noon, I decided to drive around the city, just for fun, for no particular purpose. It was easier to think while driving, and the motion distracted me from heavy thoughts. I drove down familiar streets, remembering the past, when Centerville was smaller and life seemed simpler. As I drove past the downtown district, I saw Christopher's familiar car in the parking lot outside the Golden Pheasant, one of the most expensive restaurants in town. The red sedan I'd helped him buy 3 years ago was parked next to a white BMW I knew belonged to Sarah, so they were both here. Impulsively, I parked across the street and looked across the street at the restaurant. The Golden Pheasant was famous for its fine cuisine and prices to match. A dinner for two here cost at least $200. For a family with Christopher's income, That was a serious expense, especially considering that just yesterday I had officially announced my intention to sue them. Curiosity got the best of me. I crossed the street and peered through the large windows of the restaurant. Christopher and Sarah were sitting at a corner table, and their behavior didn't look like that of people in serious crisis. On the contrary, they looked celebratory. There was a bottle of champagne on the table. Sarah was talking animatedly, gesturing with her hands, and Christopher was smiling and nodding. I entered the restaurant and asked for a table in the far corner, where I could watch them discreetly. The maitre d', recognizing me as a past regular, suggested a better table by the window, but I insisted on my choice. I needed to understand what was going on. After ordering a coffee and a light salad, I pulled out a newspaper and pretended to read, glancing occasionally at Christopher and Sarah. Their conversation was far too animated for people who had been notified of a lawsuit yesterday. Sarah was showing something on her phone screen. Christopher was looking at the image and nodding approvingly. The waitress brought them their main courses, expensive steaks with truffles, I realized from the description on the menu. They clearly hadn't been economizing. But the most striking thing was their mood. No signs of anxiety, guilt, or confusion. They looked like people celebrating a good deal. Sarah pulled a folder of documents from her purse and spread them out on the table. Christopher scrutinized the papers, signing something. Even from where I was sitting, it was obvious that they were some kind of official documents, probably related to the house, or a loan, or something else I didn't know about. I beckoned to the waitress and asked for the bill. I should have left before they noticed me. But just as I was getting ready to get up, Sarah laughed out loud and clinked her champagne glass with her husband's. The sound of her laughter was so joyful, so carefree, that my throat tightened with anger. "To our new home," she said loud enough for me to hear. "Here's to everything working out." Christopher smiled and raised his glass. "Ah, here's to Dad finally doing something useful with his money." Those words hit me like a slap in the face. Finally did something useful. So they really thought they were entitled to my savings, that I had been saving money for too long instead of spending it on their needs. Sarah unfolded the tablet and showed her husband some images. I realized from their reactions that they were pictures of interiors or furniture. They were planning home improvements. My house, bought with my money without my consent. "Look at this kitchen," Sarah said, pointing to the screen. "Italian marble, German appliances. It'll cost $40,000, but it's worth it." "What are we going to buy it with?" Christopher asked. "Your father still has enough money in his account. If we can prove that the renovation increases the value of the property, then it's an investment." Christopher laughed. "That's genius. Patricia can sue all she wants, and in the meantime, we'll fix up the house to its fullest potential." I clenched my fists under the table. They weren't just unrepentant about what they'd done, they were planning to spend even more of my money, all under the guise of investment and increasing property values. Sarah pulled out her cell phone and started dialing. "I'm calling the designer," she explained to her husband. "We'll make an appointment for tomorrow. While the court is sorting out the paperwork, we'll have time to do the basics." What if they seize the house? Arrest does not mean that you cannot live in it and make repairs. The main thing is you can't sell it, and we're not going to. Their cynical planning was astounding. They discussed spending my money with the same ease with which ordinary people plan grocery shopping, without the slightest qualms or doubts about the rightness of their actions. The waitress brought them dessert, an expensive tiramisu with gold sprinkles. Sarah took a picture of it for social media, captioning it with something about "beautiful day" and "new beginnings." So she was going to share her happiness with her friends online. I left the money on the table and headed for the exit, trying not to attract attention. But as I passed their table, Sarah looked up and our gazes met. There was a flicker of surprise in her eyes for a second, then something akin to a challenge. "Maddock," she exclaimed with a strained smile. "What a surprise." "Christopher, look who's here." The son turned and blushed when he saw me. Unlike his wife, he looked embarrassed. "Hi, Daddy. We're, just having lunch." "I see," I replied dryly. "Celebrating?" Sarah laughed, and there was no embarrassment in that laugh. "Why can't we? We bought a beautiful house. Isn't that something to celebrate?" "It is fun to buy houses with other people's money," I replied. "Not other people's money, but the family's." she countered. Christopher is your son, so it's family money. The audacity of that statement left me speechless for a few seconds. Family money belongs to the family, Sarah. And you're not part of my family enough to control my savings. Her face darkened. I've been your son's wife for 8 years. If that's not family, what is? Family is asking permission before spending $500,000, and what you've done is stealing. Christopher tried to intervene. Dad, let's not make a scene in the restaurant. People are watching. Let them look. I have nothing to hide. Unlike you. Sarah leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms over her chest. You know what, Maddock? You can complain and sue all you want, but the house is ours, and we're going to live in it whether you want us to or not. We'll see. We will. And the other thing is, we're going to do some renovations, major renovations that will increase the value of the property. That's an investment too, isn't it? She smiled the same cold smile I'd seen on their wedding day. Now the mask had finally fallen off, and I could see my sister-in-law's real face. Good luck to you, I said, and headed for the exit. Daddy, wait! Christopher tried to get up, but Sarah held his hand. Leave him alone, dear. Let him go. Old people sometimes behave inappropriately. I left the restaurant with a firm conviction that I had done the right thing. What I had seen and heard had finally convinced me that these were not misguided children who had made a mistake. They were calculating people who had deliberately decided to enrich themselves at my expense. Their festive mood, the cynicism with which they discussed further spending. Sarah's insolence. All this showed the true face of the situation. They had no intention of repenting or making amends. On the contrary, they planned to continue spending my money. Getting into the car, I dialed Patricia's number. Patricia, it's Maddock. I have some additional information for the case. Go ahead. They're planning to spend even more of my money to renovate the house. We were discussing it in the restaurant today, thinking no one could hear. I see. This will help our case. Show the court that they're acting willfully and have no intention of stopping the violations. When will the motion to arrest be heard? Tomorrow morning. I'm sure the court will grant our request. Good. Good. Also, I've finally decided to change my will. I want to give the bulk of my estate to a charitable foundation. Come by tomorrow after court. We'll draw up all the documents. That evening, the phone rang. Christopher was trying to contact me again, but the conversation at the restaurant showed that we had nothing more to talk about. Let him explain himself in court. The court hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning. I woke up at 7:30, even though my alarm clock was set for 8. Nervous tension had been keeping me awake for days. At breakfast, I reread again all the documents Patricia had prepared for the court. The statement of claim, copies of bank statements, the text of the power of attorney with the limitations of authority highlighted. Yesterday, the court had already granted the motion to foreclose on the house. Patricia called and delivered the news with ill-concealed satisfaction. Now Christopher and Sarah could not sell or mortgage the property until the final judgment was rendered. I wonder how they reacted to this news. Most likely, Sarah again accused me of being inadequate, and Christopher tried to find ways around the arrest. I arrived at the courthouse half an hour before the start of the hearing. The old familiar building, where I'd worked for 30 years, greeted me with the silence of empty corridors. It was still early and most of the staff hadn't shown up for work. I walked through the familiar halls, remembering the years of service when I sat on the other side of the judge's chair. Patricia showed up at exactly 10:30, holding a bulky file folder. She looked confident and collected, as she always did before important meetings. Good morning, Maddock. Ready? More than ready. Christopher's hired a lawyer, one Robert Still, young but ambitious. He'll probably try to make it look like a family misunderstanding. Let him try. The facts speak for themselves. We went to room 3 where the hearing was to be held. The judge was Barbara Clark, a middle-aged woman I knew from my days as an assistant prosecutor. Fair and principled, she had no patience for attempts to deceive the court. Christopher and Sarah were already seated at the defendant's table. Next to them was their attorney, a really young man of about 35, wearing an expensive suit and a self-assured expression. Sarah was dressed conservatively, clearly trying to give the impression of a respectable housewife. Christopher looked pale and nervous. As I entered the hall, my son looked up and our gazes met. In his eyes, I saw a mixture of guilt, fear, and some childish resentment. as if I was the one who had done him an injustice, not the other way around. Sarah looked at me with ill-concealed anger, but quickly turned away, apparently having been instructed by her lawyer to behave with restraint. Judge Clark entered at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. Everyone rose and the familiar procedure began. The clerk read out the case and the judge called the case to order. "The plaintiff has the floor," Judge Clark said. Patricia stood up and clearly, without unnecessary emotion, stated the essence of the claims. Excessive power of attorney, misuse of funds, lack of consent of the account holder for a large purchase. She read out the exact text of the power of attorney, emphasizing the limitations of authority, then showed the bank documents confirming the debit. "Your Honor," Patricia said, "the power of attorney clearly limits the defendant's authority to medical expenses and emergency household needs. The purchase of a house worth $485,000 does not fall into those categories in any way." The judge scrutinized the documents presented. "I see. The defendant has the floor." Counselor still stood up and tried to put the case in a different light. "Your Honor, my client was acting on behalf of his elderly father. 72-year-old Mr. Preston had accumulated a substantial amount of money that was sitting dead in a bank account. Buying a property in a prestigious neighborhood is a wise investment that will preserve and increase the family capital. But the consent of the owner of the funds was not obtained," clarified the judge. "My client planned to notify his father later when the transaction would have been fully formalized. It was supposed to be a gift for a family anniversary." Patricia immediately objected. "Your Honor, the defendant's wedding anniversary is April 28th. The transaction was consummated on March 23rd, a month before the supposed gift. In addition, the house is in the defendant's name, not the plaintiff's." "That's a technicality," still tried to justify himself. "My client was going to transfer the property to his father." "Are there any documents confirming this intention?" asked the judge. The lawyer hesitated. "Not at the moment, but..." "Then it's just allegations without evidence." The judge turned to Christopher. "Defendant, please rise. Explain to the court on what basis you felt authorized to spend such a large sum without the consent of the owner of the funds." Christopher stood up, nervously adjusting his tie. "Your Honor, I was actually planning on giving my father a gift. And besides, I have a power of attorney." "A power of attorney with expressly limited powers," the judge interrupted. "Did you read it before you used it?" "I did, but I was thinking." "What exactly did you think?" "That because I'm the son, I have the right..." The judge raised her hand to stop him. "In the legal field, family ties don't automatically entitle you to someone else's property. A power of attorney is a legal document with specific limitations." Patricia stood up for additions. "Your Honor, I'd like to draw the court's attention to the fact that the defendants show no signs of remorse. Yesterday, they were celebrating a purchase at an expensive restaurant and discussing plans to further spend the plaintiff's money on home improvements." Attorney still attempted to object. "These are unsubstantiated allegations." "Sure, Mom. We have a witness," Patricia replied. "The plaintiff himself was present during this conversation." The judge looked at me. "Mr. Preston, tell us what you saw and heard." I stood up and gave a detailed account of the meeting at the restaurant, relaying Sarah's exact words about the renovation plans and her cynical comments about my money. The judge listened attentively, occasionally making notes. "Are there any objections from the defendants?" she asked when I had finished. Sarah leaned over to her lawyer and whispered something fiercely in his ear. Still tried to save face. "Your Honor, a private conversation between spouses cannot be evidence of..." "A private conversation in a public place is not private," the judge said dryly, "especially when it concerns plans to further violate the plaintiff's rights." The trial went on for about an hour. Still tried to find various loopholes, referred to family circumstances, talked about the good intentions of his clients. But each of his arguments crashed on simple facts. The power of attorney had clear limitations. Consent to purchase was not received. The house is registered on the defendant. Finally, the judge adjourned for a decision. Patricia and I stepped out into the hallway. Christopher and Sarah remained in the hall, quietly conferring with the lawyer. "What do you think of our chances?" I asked Patricia. 100%. Clark is a fair judge. She sees the obvious violations." Half an hour later, we were invited back into the courtroom. The judge read the decision clearly and without emotion. The court recognizes the real estate sale and purchase transaction of March 23rd invalid due to excessive power of attorney. The defendants are obliged to return to the plaintiff the sum of $485,000 within 30 days. If voluntary repayment cannot be made, the property shall be subject to forced sale at public auction. Sarah turned pale upon hearing the judgment. Christopher covered his face with his hands. Their lawyer was writing something in a notebook, apparently preparing an appeal. In addition, the judge continued, the defendants must reimburse the plaintiff's court costs in the amount of $5,000. After the decision was announced, I approached Christopher. Sarah defiantly turned away, but my son looked up at me with eyes full of tears. Dad, are you really willing to destroy a family over money? You ruined the family when you decided to steal $500,000 from your father. I didn't steal. You thought I'd be dead soon and you'd still get the money, but it turns out you don't want to wait. That's not true, and Christopher, after today, there will be a change in my will. Your share will be a token amount. I'm giving the bulk of my estate to a charitable foundation. My son looked at me with horror. You can't do that. Yes, I can, and I will. Today, Sarah turned to me, anger in her eyes. You selfish old man. We're the only family you've got. Family doesn't steal from each other, Sarah. What you've done is stealing, covered up with hypocritical talk of investment. We'll give you your money back, shouted Christopher. With what? You don't have that kind of money. We'll sell the house. The court has already decided that the house will be sold, and the money will come back to me. Patricia came over and touched me on the shoulder. Maddox, we have to go. The probate papers are ready. I looked at my son and daughter-in-law once more. Christopher was crying, not hiding his tears. Sarah stood stone-faced, fists clenched. Their lawyer was explaining something to them about the appeal, but I could see they weren't listening. Goodbye, I said, and headed for the exit. Daddy! Christopher shouted behind me. Dad, wait! But I didn't stop. The time for talking was over. Justice had been done, and my decision about the will was final. Outside, Patricia shook my hand. Congratulations on your victory. Now let's make a new will? Yes, and make it quick. I don't want them to have any illusions about my plans. We got in the car and drove to Patricia's office. The hardest part was over. Justice had been served and my son had learned a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life. After the court hearing, I spent the rest of the day at Patricia's office drafting a new will. The document was very clear. Christopher would receive a token $10,000, and the bulk of my estate would go to an elderly charity. Patricia double-checked my decision, making sure I was acting deliberately, not emotionally. Are you sure, Maddox? It's a big step. Perhaps I should leave my son a little more. $10,000 is more than he deserves after today. If it wasn't for the bloodline, he wouldn't have gotten it. The papers were signed, witnessed, and deposited in the safe deposit box. Christopher was now officially disinherited of most of the inheritance his wife had longed for. Justice had been fully restored. At home, I poured myself a whiskey and sat in my favorite chair. Outside the window, the sun was setting, coloring the sky orange. Usually this time of day brought peace, but today my soul felt strangely empty. The victory in court had not brought the expected satisfaction. Rather, it left a feeling of a major chapter of life completed. The phone was silent. Christopher hadn't called since the court's decision had been announced. Perhaps he'd finally realized the gravity of the situation, or maybe Sarah had forbidden him to contact me. Either way, the silence was welcome. I needed time to process what had happened and adjust to the new reality. The next morning, around 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Christopher. He was standing on the porch alone, without Sarah, holding a bouquet of flowers and some kind of package. He looked depressed, his shoulders slumped, his eyes red from a sleepless night. I hesitated for a few seconds whether to open the door, but curiosity got the better of me. I wondered what he would say after last night's trial. "Hi, Dad," Christopher said when I opened the door. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you." "Talk about what? It's already settled. Please, at least let me explain myself." I stepped aside, letting him into the house. Christopher walked into the living room, looking around as if he were seeing his parents' house for the first time. He set the flowers on the coffee table and held the bag in his hands, hesitant to open it. "This is for you," he said, holding it out to me. Siopurhanikunin, your favorite coffee from that coffee shop on Main Street, and the cookies you used to buy when I was a kid. Christopher, I'm not going to change my mind because of coffee and cookies. I know you're not. I just wanted to show you that I remember what you mean to me. He sat down in the chair across from me, clenching and unclenching his fists. I could tell he'd been carefully preparing for this conversation, choosing his words. Dad, I realize what I did was wrong. I know I should have asked permission, but believe me, I was really looking out for your best interests. My best interests? I couldn't contain my sarcasm. Buying a house where you and your wife and not me will live? We wanted you to move in with us. The new house has a private room with a bathroom. You could live with us and we could take care of you. And who came up with that idea? You or Sarah? Christopher hesitated, and I could tell by the look on his face that the idea wasn't his. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we were thinking about family. Son, in 8 years of marriage, you've never once invited me over for dinner in your apartment. Suddenly you think I should move into a house I bought with my own money without my consent? We were busy building our careers. Sarah was building a career? That's interesting. In what field? Christopher blushed. We both knew his wife hadn't worked a single day since they'd met. Dad, we can fix this situation. I'll find a way to get the money back. How? Your paycheck won't even cover the interest on that much. I'll take out a loan. I'll get a second job. Sarah will get a job too. Sarah will take the job? That's news? She'll understand when I explain it to her. It was clear from his son's tone that Sarah wasn't going to understand. She was probably blaming her husband for all the problems and demanding that he find a way around the judgment. Christopher, tell me honestly, whose idea was it to spend my money? There was a long pause. His son looked at the floor, hesitating to answer. We discussed it together. That means the idea was Sarah's. She saw the house, decided she deserved it, and convinced you to use power of attorney. It's not that simple, Dad. How is it? Explain it to me. Christopher stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the street. Sarah says you're too stingy, that you save money for no purpose, and we have to live in a cramped apartment and skimp on everything. And you agree with her? Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I think she's right. Why do you need so much money? You're single. You don't spend much. Christopher, it's my money. I earned it through hard work. I have the right to spend it as I see fit. But sooner or later, I'm going to get it. No, you won't. I rewrote my will yesterday. My son turned around, and I saw the horror in his eyes. What? Dad, you can't? I can, and I did. You get $10,000. The rest will go to charity. Christopher slumped in his chair as if he'd been prodded. Dad, that's cruel. I'm your only son. The only son who stole $500,000 from my father. I didn't steal. I meant well. Christopher, stop lying to yourself and to me. You and Sarah thought you were entitled to my money. You thought I was too old to handle it. But you miscalculated. My son's cell phone rang. Sarah's name came up on the screen. Christopher nervously dropped the call, but a minute later the phone rang again. Answer it, I said. I wonder what your wife will say. Christopher reluctantly took the call. Sarah, I'm at my dad's. We're talking. No, we haven't decided anything yet. Sarah, don't scream, please. He went to the window, but I could still hear his daughter-in-law's furious voice. She was clearly unhappy that her husband was trying to make peace with me without her input. Okay, I'll be right there, Christopher said and hung up. Is Sarah unhappy? I asked. She's worried. She doesn't understand why we're taking this to court. Do you understand? Honestly? No. I think we could do this the family way. Family style is when a son asks his father's permission before he spends his money, not when he steals it and then tries to justify it. Christopher was about to leave. On the doorstep, he turned around. Dad, I love you, no matter what, and I want us to stay a family. I love you too, son, but love doesn't mean you can steal with impunity. We're going to make it right, I promise. Christopher, as long as you're married to Sarah, you won't change. She won't let you. Don't talk about my wife like that. Then prove me wrong. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about the conversation. Christopher looked genuinely upset, But his words showed that he still hadn't realized the extent of his mistake. To him, it was still a misunderstanding that could be settled with apologies and promises. Around noon, another doorbell rang. This time Sarah came in. She stood on the threshold with a determined expression on her face, dressed in a strict business suit. Apparently, she was preparing for a serious conversation. "Oh, Maddock, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "I don't think we have anything to talk about." "Yes, there is. About how you're ruining your son's life. Come on in. I'll hear what you have to say." Sarah entered the house looking like a hostess. She always acted too freely here, as if she already thought she was the heiress. "Christopher told me about the will. Do you really think you're being fair?" "Am more than fair. After what you did, we invested your money. Real estate is going up in value. In a house that belongs to you, not me. Details. The important thing is that the money is working, not lying dead. Sarah, it's my money, and I get to decide how it's spent. You're selfish, Maddock. All you think about is yourself. Do you think about me when you spend my money without asking? We're thinking of the future, a family. Christopher's too soft to demand a fair share from you. A fair share? Of my own money? You're old and alone. You have no other heirs. Sooner or later, we'll get it all." "It won't. I change my will." Sarah's face contorted with anger. "You have no right. Christopher is your son." "I have every right. It's my property. We'll find a way to contest the will. Say you were insane. We can do that. It's a witness document with a medical report that I'm legally competent." Sarah paced the room like an angry tiger. "You're destroying this family. Christopher is suffering because of your stubbornness. You destroyed the family when you decided to steal from me." "We didn't steal." "Then what do you call it? Taking someone else's money without permission? It's called taking care of the family assets." The absurdity of this statement struck me. Sarah really believed what she was saying. For her, my money had been family money for a long time, and I was just interfering with its proper use. "Sarah, get out of my house." "What?" I said, "Get out, and don't come back." "You can't tell me not to. I'm your son's wife. I can, and I will. My house, my rules." She stopped at the door and turned around. "You'll regret this, Maddock. We'll find a way to get what's ours. Nothing belongs to you, and the sooner you realize that, the better." That evening, Christopher sent a text message. "Dad, Sarah's very upset. She says you were rude to her. Maybe we should all get together and talk things out calmly." I deleted the message without responding. The time for discussion had passed. The next few days passed in relative silence. Christopher didn't call, which was fine with me. Perhaps he was mulling over our last conversation, or perhaps Sarah had forbidden him to contact me. Either way, the lack of intrusive attempts at reconciliation was welcome. I spent that time researching various charitable organizations. The decision to place the bulk of my inheritance in good hands required careful selection. I didn't want my money to go to crooks or be spent on administrative costs instead of helping those in need. On Wednesday morning, I went to the city library to research reports from nonprofit organizations. The old library, where I spent a lot of time during my college years, greeted me with the familiar smell of books and the quiet of reading rooms. The librarian, a middle-aged woman with glasses, helped me find the materials I needed. I was most interested in the Dignified Old Age Fund, which was dedicated to supporting elderly people in difficult life situations. The organization had already existed for 15 years, had an impeccable reputation, and transparent reporting. They helped pay medical bills, provided caregivers, and provided hot lunches for lonely old people. I wrote down the foundation's contact information and decided to meet with its leadership in person. It was too important a decision to make in absentia. Besides, I wanted to make sure that my money would actually reach those who needed it. The foundation's office was located in a small building on the outskirts of the business center. There were no luxuries or frills, simple offices, modest furniture, and walls hung with thank you letters from beneficiaries. The director's name was Helen Rice, an elegant woman in her 60s who had worked in social services all her life. "Mr. Preston," she said when I explained the purpose of my visit, "this would be a tremendous help to our foundation. But I have to ask, are you sure about your decision? It's a serious amount of money." "I'm absolutely sure. I have every reason to believe that the money will be used properly. Huh. Can you talk about your motivation? We keep detailed records of all major donations. I told Helen about the situation with my son and daughter-in-law without going into detail, but explaining that the only heir was untrustworthy, and I prefer the money to go to those who really need it. I understand, Helen nodded. Unfortunately, such family conflicts happen quite often. Many of our donors decide to make a bequest after being disappointed with their relatives. She showed me the foundation's reports for the past 5 years, told me about its programs, and introduced me to several of its staff members. Everything gave the impression of an honest, efficiently run organization. Just what I needed. If you do decide to make such a donation, Helen said in parting, we could set up a donor-advised fund, the Maddox Preston Foundation for the Elderly. That would ensure that the funds would be used for their intended purpose and that your contribution would be remembered. I like the idea. A named fund guaranteed that the money would be spent for its intended purpose and not dissolve into the organization's general budget. When I got home, I called Patricia and asked for a meeting to finalize the will. There were a number of clarifications to be made and information about the charitable foundation to be added. Maddox, have you finally decided to disinherit your son? Patricia asked when we met in her office the next day. Not completely. He'll get $10,000. That's enough to show that I'm mindful of the family ties, but not enough to make him feel secure. And the rest of the estate, the house, savings, investments, everything goes to the Decent Aging Fund with the stipulation that a donor-advised fund be established. Patricia amended the document, and we carefully checked every wording. The will was drafted in such a way that it could not be contested. A medical certificate of capacity, witness statements, detailed reasons for decisions, everything was provided for. Christopher might try to contest the will on the grounds of your age or emotional state, Patricia warned. Let him try. He has no grounds for such a claim. However, I recommend that you notify him of the changes in advance. That will eliminate claims that the decision was made in secret. That's a good idea. Send him a copy of the will in an official letter. I'll do it today. The paperwork took about 2 hours. When it was done, I felt strangely relieved. The decision had been made. The papers had been signed. Justice had been done. Christopher will get exactly what he deserves after what he did, and my money will help people who really need it. The next morning, Friday, the doorbell rang around 9 o'clock. I expected to see the mailman or a courier, but Christopher stood on the doorstep with an envelope in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes red from a sleepless night. Papa, is it true? He shook the envelope. Did you really disinherit me? No, I didn't. I reduced your share to a reasonable amount. $10,000? After everything we've been through? After everything you've done, that's generous. Christopher walked into the house without waiting for an invitation. He looked confused and depressed. Dad, I realize what I did was wrong, but can't you forgive your only son? Forgiveness and inheritance are different things. I can forgive you as a father, but I can't trust my money to a man who's already proven himself unreliable. Sarah's furious. She says you're getting back at us. What do you think? Christopher sat down in his chair and covered his face with his hands. I don't know what to think. Been up all night trying to figure out how we got to this point. It's very simple. You thought you were entitled to my money and you took it without asking. We meant well. Christopher, stop repeating that mantra. We meant well as a childish excuse. You're a grown man and you need to take responsibility for your actions. What if I divorce Sarah? What if I prove that I've changed? The question took me by surprise. I didn't expect Christopher to take that step. Are you serious? I don't know, maybe I am. Sarah, she's not who I thought she was 8 years ago. And what's changed? Yesterday, when she found out about the will, she said some things, accusing me of being weak, calling me a loser who couldn't provide for my family. Said she wasted her best years on me. So, and you're just realizing this now? I used to think she was just ambitious, that she wanted a better life. But yesterday, I saw what she's really like. Christopher stood up and went to the window. Outside the window was the garden that Mildred and I planted together 20 years ago. Do you remember when my mother taught me how to plant roses? He asked. She said it took patience and care to grow something beautiful. I do. Sarah never understood that. She wanted everything all at once, ready to go. A nice house, expensive things, status, no matter what the cost. Did you understand? I thought I did, but it turned out I was just overlooking the obvious. We were quiet for a few minutes. Birds were chirping outside the window, and the spring air was filled with the scent of blossoming trees. A peaceful, tranquil picture, contrasting with the drama that was unfolding in our family. Dad, if I divorce Sarah and prove I've changed, will you revise the will? Christopher, this isn't just about Sarah. It's about the choices you made. You took my money without authorization. That's your decision, not hers. But she convinced me. You could only be convinced because you were ready for it. If you thought it was wrong, no one could convince you. So there's no chance? I didn't say there was no chance. But if there is, it's very small, and it's going to take a long time to rebuild trust. How long? I don't know. Maybe years. Maybe never. Christopher nodded, accepting the harsh reality. I see. And the money for the house? When do you have to pay it back? You have 30 days by court order. If you don't return it voluntarily, the house will be sold forcibly. We don't have that kind of money. I know, that's why the house will be sold. Where are we going to live? That's your problem, not mine. Tough, but fair. I wasn't going to solve the problems they created themselves. Before he left, Christopher turned around. Dad, do you really not love me anymore? The question struck straight to the heart. Despite all the hurt and disappointments, I still love my son. But love didn't mean being willing to indulge his weaknesses. I do, but that doesn't mean I'm going to overlook your mistakes. I see. He left the house and I was left alone with my thoughts. The conversation showed me that Christopher was beginning to realize the magnitude of what had happened. Perhaps this is the first step towards realizing his own responsibility. But it was too late to make a difference. 3 days after I spoke to Christopher, Sarah came to see me. This time she didn't come alone, but was accompanied by a middle-aged man in an expensive suit. A lawyer, I gathered from their demeanor. They stopped at my front door with the look of people ready for a serious fight. I opened the door and looked at them in silence. Sarah was dressed sternly but elegantly, her hair neatly styled, her makeup flawless. She was clearly preparing for an important conversation and wanted to impress. Her companion held a leather briefcase and looked confident. Maddock, we need to have a serious talk, Sarah said in a tone that brooked no objection. This is Mr. Garvey, the family law attorney. I have my own lawyer, I replied. If you want to negotiate, Patricia Hamilton is the person to talk to. We're not here to negotiate, Sarah objected. We're here to explain a few important things to you. Curiosity took over. I wondered what strategy they had chosen this time. Come in, I said, stepping aside. We walked into the living room. Sarah sat in the chair as if she were the lady of the house, and the lawyer sat next to her, pulling some files out of his briefcase. I sat across from them, waiting for the introductions to begin. Maddock, Sarah began in a soft, almost affectionate tone, we're here because we're concerned about you, about your mental state. My mental state? Yes. Your behavior lately has raised serious concerns. You've been making impulsive decisions, disinheriting your only son, acting aggressively. Attorney Garvey nodded, supporting his client's words. Mr. Preston, family conflicts often lead to maladaptive reactions in the elderly. It's not your fault, but the problem needs to be addressed. Soon. And how do you suggest it be addressed? Get a medical evaluation, Sarah replied, to make sure you're making decisions in your right mind. And if the examination shows that I'm mentally healthy, then we can talk about couples therapy, Sarah continued nonchalantly. About ways to rebuild relationships. I laughed. The woman's insolence knew no bounds. Sarah, do you really think I'm that stupid? What do you mean? You're trying to make it seem like I'm the problem, like I'm the one who's acting inappropriately, not you who stole $500,000. We didn't steal, she countered. We made an investment. An investment with my money without my consent. Attorney Garvey decided to intervene. Mr. Preston, let's look at the situation objectively. Your son had a legal power of attorney. He used it to purchase real estate, which is a good investment. The power of attorney limited his powers to medical expenses and household needs. This is a debatable interpretation. The concept of urgent financial matters can be interpreted broadly. The court has already ruled the transaction has been invalidated. First instance decisions can be appealed, Garvey replied nonchalantly. Especially if there is reason to doubt the plaintiff's capacity. Now the cards were open. They were planning to challenge the judgment, citing my alleged incapacity. Classic desperate man move. You have no reason to doubt my capacity, I said calmly. There is, Sarah countered. Your erratic behavior, your impulsive decisions, your aggressiveness, these are all signs of age-related mental changes. Sanam, what kind of impulsive decisions? Taking legal action against your own son, changing your will, refusing family reconciliation. These are not impulsive decisions, but logical consequences of your actions. Attorney Garvey pulled some documents out of a folder. Mr. Preston, we're prepared to offer a compromise. You drop the lawsuit, reinstate the old will, and my client pays you a token compensation for the use of the funds. What token compensation? $5,000. The cynicism of that offer shocked me. They stole almost $500,000, and they're offering compensation of 1% of what they stole. Are you serious? More than serious, Sarah replied. It's a fair offer. You get the compensation, we keep the house. The family stays intact. And if I refuse, then we'll be forced to apply to the court to declare you incompetent, Garvey said calmly. The threat was direct. If I don't agree to their terms, they'll try to have me incapacitated. On what grounds? Some. Inappropriate behavior, impulsive decisions, aggression toward close relatives, Sarah listed. Do you have medical reports? We'll get them, the lawyer replied confidently. There will be specialists who will confirm our fears. Corrupt specialists? Competent specialists who will give an objective assessment of your condition. I stood up and walked around the room thinking about the situation. They were trying to blackmail me, but they weren't very good at it. The threat of incapacitation was empty. There was too much evidence of my normal mental state. Sarah, where's Christopher? Why didn't he come in person? Christopher's upset about your behavior. It's hard for him to see his father turn into an angry old man. Or is he ashamed of what he's doing? He didn't do anything wrong. Then why can't he look me in the eye? Sarah rose from her chair, and there was an aggressive note in her voice. Because you intimidated him, made him feel guilty for taking care of the family future. Taken care of? By stealing $500,000 from his own father? That wasn't your money, it was family money. Family money? I couldn't contain my amazement. Can you please explain to me how my personal savings became family money? Because you have no other heirs. Christopher would have gotten it all sooner or later? No, it wouldn't. The will has been changed. This will is invalid, Sarah shouted. You made it under the influence. I have a medical certificate of capacity. Certificates can be forged. Attorney Garvey put his hand on his client's shoulder, trying to calm her down. Sarah was clearly losing control of herself, and it was hurting their position. Mr. Preston, he said in a conciliatory tone, let's not bring the matter to a scandal. My offer still stands. Your offer is blackmail, I replied, and a rather inept one at that. It's not blackmail, but an attempt to settle the family conflict peacefully. An amicable settlement? After your client accused me of incapacity and threatened to sue me? Emotions can get the better of you sometimes. No emotion, cold calculation. You tried to intimidate me, but you miscalculated. Sarah jumped out of her seat again. You think you're so smart, but we'll find a way to get what belongs to us. Nothing belongs to you. Yes, it does. I've put up with your neglect for 8 years. 8 years of pretending to respect you. I deserve that money. What exactly did you earn it for? For being a good daughter-in-law, for supporting Christopher, for planning to take care of you in your old age. A good daughter-in-law? I laughed. You never once invited me to visit, never once inquired about my health, never once called me on my birthday. That's because you were cold and unfriendly. I was polite and reserved. There's a huge difference. You never loved me. I did. And now I realize I was right. Sarah stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily with anger. The mask of the well-mannered daughter-in-law had finally come off, and I could see her real face, angry, greedy, full of hatred. "You know what, old man?" She gritted her teeth. "You're going to die before us anyway, and then we'll contest the will. We'll find a way to prove you were insane. You can try, but first you'll have to pay back the money you stole. We won't get it back. Then your house will be foreclosed on. We'll find a way to avoid that." "How?" "We'll redistribute the property. We'll donate the house to a relative. The house is seized. Any attempt to foreclose on it will be resisted." Attorney Garvey stood up, realizing the conversation had reached an impasse. "Mr. Preston, we gave you a chance to settle this peacefully. You turned it down. Now we'll see you in court." "We will, but don't think you can intimidate me with threats of incapacitation." "We'll see," Sarah said and headed for the door. When they left, I stood at the window for a long time, watching their car go around the corner. The visit showed that they were willing to go all the way using whatever methods they could, but their desperation was obvious. People who are sure of their rightness do not resort to threats and blackmail. In the evening, Christopher called. His voice was tired and depressed. "Dad, Sarah told me about your conversation. What do you think about it?" "I think it's gone too far." "I agree. You went too far when you stole my money." "Dad, we can stop. Stop this war." "You can. Return the money and apologize publicly." "We don't have the money." "Then what's there to talk about?" "Can't we find a compromise?" "What kind of compromise? Your lawyer offered me $5,000 for the $500,000 you stole. Is that your idea of a compromise?" It was Sarah's idea. "And your idea?" A long pause, then Christopher said with a sigh, "I don't know, Dad. I'm confused. Sarah says one thing, you say another. I don't know who to listen to." "Listen to your conscience." "My conscience says what I did was wrong, but Sarah says it's you who's being unreasonable. Who do you trust more, your conscience or Sarah?" Another pause, then a quiet answer. "Sarah. She's my wife. I have to support her." "Then you've made your choice." "Dad, it's clear, Christopher. You chose a side. Now live with the consequences of that choice." I hung up. The conversation had put a final end to our relationship. My son chose to support his wife rather than try to right his own wrong. His choice, his responsibility. It's been 2 weeks since I last spoke to Christopher. The 30-day period given by the court for voluntary repayment expired tomorrow. Neither of them had contacted me. No attempt had been made to resolve the situation. So tomorrow would be the start of the proceedings to force the sale of the house. I sat on the veranda with my morning coffee, watching my neighbor Mrs. Coleman water her roses. The quiet, measured life of the neighborhood continued, unaffected by the family drama that was unfolding in my house. Birds sang, children played in yards, the mailman delivered mail. The world did not stop with the fact that I had disinherited my son and severed my relationship with him. In the morning came a letter from the court notifying me of the commencement of foreclosure proceedings. Standard wording, stamps, signatures. The bureaucratic language hid the human drama, but the gist was clear. Christopher and Sarah's house would be auctioned off in a week, and the proceeds would be returned to me. I reread the document twice, making sure it was correct. Patricia's work had been impeccable, and every formality had been observed. No loopholes for appeal, no procedural irregularities. Justice prevailed with the methodical inevitability of a judicial machine. After breakfast, I went to the bank to check on the account. Rachel Watson greeted me with a professional smile, but there was sympathy in her eyes. News of the family conflict had spread through the small town, and many people knew what had happened. "Mr. Preston, how are you doing?" she asked as she printed out the statement. "I'm fine. Justice has been served, and the money will be back soon." "That's good. It must have been hard suing your son, though." "Hard, but necessary. You can't let someone close to you break the law with impunity." Rachel nodded without commenting. Professional ethics prohibited her from discussing her client's personal affairs, but human empathy was obvious. The statement showed that my account was virtually empty. Only current funds for everyday expenses remained. The bulk of the money had been spent by Christopher to buy a house. The money would come back in a week, but for now I was living on the minimum. Symbolic in a way, the material losses mirrored the emotional ones. Leaving the bank, I met Dr. Wilson, our family doctor, an elderly man with kind eyes who had treated our family for over 15 years. He stopped when he saw me, and we shook hands. "Maddock, how are you? I haven't seen you at the clinic in a long time." "I'm fine, doctor. I'm trying not to get sick." "That's commendable. How's your family? I heard you had some problems." The news really spread fast. It's hard to keep family secrets in a small town. Problems get resolved through the courts. Dr. Wilson frowned. "Maddock, I'm sorry to intrude, but family conflicts are very unhealthy at your age. Perhaps we should try to find a compromise." "Doctor, compromise is only possible when both parties are willing to compromise. In my case, one party stole the money and the other party is demanding it back. How can there be a compromise?" "I understand your position. I'm just concerned for your well-being." "Thank you for your concern, but my moral health is more important than my physical health right now." The doctor shook my hand in farewell, but there was anxiety in his eyes. I guess he thought I was being too hard on my son. A lot of people in town probably thought the same thing. An elderly father should be forgiving and merciful, not suing an only child. But they didn't know the full circumstances of the case. They didn't see Sarah's cynicism, didn't hear her talk about how my money was theirs by right. They didn't know about the blackmail attempts and threats to declare me incompetent. It's easy to give advice when you don't know the full picture. At home, I called Patricia to confirm the details of the upcoming auction. "Maddock, everything's going according to plan. The house was appraised at $490,000. The starting bid will be 80% of the appraised value." "So about 400,000? "Yes. If there's more than one buyer, it could go up to market value or even higher." "What if the house doesn't sell?" "Then the lender would own it, which would be you." "But this is unlikely. Real estate in that neighborhood is in demand." "Serena Nuranos." "Did Christopher and Sarah do anything to stop the sale?" "Their attorney filed several motions, but all were denied. They have no legal grounds to stop the proceedings." "Okay." Cell phone rings. "Keep me posted." After talking to Patricia, I felt a strange emptiness. Technically, everything had gone right, justice had been served, but there was no emotional satisfaction. Defeating my own son did not bring joy. In the evening, I sat in the living room going through old photographs, family snapshots from different years, capturing happy moments. Christopher, the baby on the swing. Christopher, the schoolboy with a certificate of excellence. Christopher, the student in his university gown. In all the photos, he was smiling genuinely and openly. When did everything change? At what point did an obedient, kind boy turn into a man capable of stealing from his own father? Maybe it was me. Was it because I was too strict, too demanding? Or was it Sarah's fault that she was poisoning her son against me? Most likely the truth lay somewhere in the middle. I really wasn't the warmest father, preferring justice to emotion. And Sarah was taking advantage of that, gradually turning her husband against me. But in any case, it was Christopher who made the final choice, and that choice turned out to be the wrong one. The phone rang around 10 o'clock at night. It was an unfamiliar number and I hesitated to answer, but curiosity won out. "Hello? Mr. Preston, this is Helen Rice from the Worthy Age Foundation." "Good evening, Helen. Is something the matter?" "No, nothing bad. I just wanted to let you know that we've been pre-approved for a name fund. The Maddock Preston Foundation will be officially launched as soon as the funds come in." "That's wonderful. Maddock, can I ask you a personal question? Have you changed your mind?" "It's a very large donation." "I haven't changed my mind. On the contrary, I'm more and more convinced every day that I've made the right decision." "Then I'd like to say thank you. On behalf of all the people your foundation will help, there are only a handful of donors. There's nothing to thank. Money should be put to good use, not left lying around dead. We're planning a small opening ceremony for the foundation. I hope you'll agree to attend." Sure, it would be interesting to see how my money would be spent." I was in a better mood after talking to Helen. It was nice to know that my decision would help specific people. Lonely old people would get medical care, hot lunches, and nursing care. The money Christopher had planned to spend on luxuries would go to really important needs. The next day, the bidding took place. I wasn't there in person, but Patricia reported regularly on the progress of the procedure. The house aroused the interest of several buyers. The price rose to $480,000. Almost all of the money Christopher had spent was coming back to me. The buyer was a young family with 2 children, said Patricia on the phone. They had been looking for a house in this neighborhood for a long time. Where will Christopher and Sarah live now? I have no idea. It's not our problem anymore. Yes, you're right. In the evening, I went out into the garden to water the flowers that Mildred used to plant. Roses she loved, peonies, irises. Everything was blooming and fragrant despite the family drama. Nature continued its cycle, oblivious to human suffering. Mrs. Coleman's neighbor waved to me over the fence. Good evening, Maddock. I heard your house on Oaks Hill sold today. News travels fast in a small town. It wasn't my house, I replied. And yes, it was. Where will Christopher and his wife live now? I don't know. That's their problem. Mrs. Coleman shook her head sympathetically but said nothing. Apparently she thought I was a cruel old man who'd thrown my son out on the street. But she didn't know all the circumstances of the case. As I watered the roses, I thought about what a real family is. Blood relation doesn't automatically make people close. A real family is based on mutual respect, trust, and a willingness to support each other in times of need. Christopher and Sarah have shown that they do not possess these qualities, but Helen Rice and the foundation staff, whom I hardly knew, showed more understanding and sympathy than my relatives. Maybe true family is not made up of those to whom you are related by blood, but of those who share your values and principles. After finishing my work in the garden, I went into the house and sat down at the writing table. I wanted to write down my thoughts while they were still fresh. Perhaps someday these notes will help someone else who is facing the betrayal of loved ones. Justice was served, money was returned, and a lesson was taught. Christopher and Sarah got what they deserved for their actions, and I found peace knowing that I had done the right thing. The loneliness was painful, but it was honest. Better to be alone than surrounded by people who only see you as a source of funding. Tomorrow begins a new chapter of life, with no illusions about family ties, but with a clear understanding that justice trumps than bloodlines, and with the confidence that my money will help those who really need it.